of 1,000 years of bloodshed is just vandalism, as far as I can see, to remove that structure. And we of all people, Jews of all people should know that you tread lightly in this continent, given its history. You do not run amok with a pair of scissors, cutting these bonds that have helped keep the peace. And just because I know you want me to conclude, for the proof of it, just look who was on the side outside this country. Who is happy about this Brexit vote? Vladimir Putin is happy. Marine Le Pen is happy. Donald Trump is happy. Geert Wilders in Holland is happy. They're the only ones who are pleased about this. Elsewhere, other people tremble at what we've done, and I think Jews particularly.
And just to add another Jewish aspect to the question, which I thought you might come to in terms of immigration, it's been written as well as in our paper, which I think you objected to, was that it's a very un-Jewish thing to do, to vote with fear about immigration, considering how many Jews came to this country and to many countries in the diaspora as refugees. And I think that argument made you very angry, and you yourself are a granddaughter of refugees, so you know from where you speak. I thought maybe you could relate to that as well as to Jonathan's point just now.
Sure. Well, the list of charges against me is growing exponentially by the second. So I'll try and be as brief as I can. On the question of serfdom and slavery, I mean, clearly, as anyone I hope can see, I was not saying that Britain was in the state of having to create bricks without straw. I was drawing an analogy in order to show that people don't like freedom. Serfdom is a term it's a figure of speech. There was a famous book called Road to Serfdom by Professor Hayek, which is about economics. He didn't believe that we were currently in a feudal system. He used it to explain the difference between freedom and unfreedom. And I think that one of the fundamentals of freedom is the ability of a nation to govern itself, and I don't believe that we have had that under the EU. As far as Scotland is concerned, I certainly would not wish to see Scotland leave the Union. Scotland is an integral part of the United Kingdom. It's made this country as great as it is. The idea, however, that this is an automatic departure of Scotland, I think, is very wide of the mark. As we can see, Nicola Sturgeon has been rightly extremely cautious about saying that she will call a second referendum. She knows she will only have 2 shots at this. She has said it is now on the table. Well, that's absolutely fair enough. The circumstances would appear from her point of view to have materially changed. Fair enough, it's on the table. But as we can also see, first of all, the European Union is not exactly keen to welcome an independent Scotland to the EU because of pressure from Spain and others who are very concerned about their secessionist movements. It is also the case that once the people of Scotland have explained to them what financial burdens they will accrue from independence, they may change their minds. It is also the case that Nicola Sturgeon, Jonathan, no one here can tell what form the EU will be in, or what shape it will be in, that the Scottish people will be invited to pledge their undying allegiance to in order to come away from Britain. We don't know, none of us knows, where this thing with Britain and the EU is going to go.
Can I just come back on that specific point? I mean, we probably don't want to do too much on Scotland for this audience, but just, first of all, she didn't just say it's on the table, she said it was highly likely. Second, it won't depend on what offer is there. She will just say, do we want to be independent of the United Kingdom? It will be just like the referendum you just supported. It won't get into the detail of what's coming next. That will be the leap in the dark. It will just say, do you want to leave the United Kingdom? And in this climate, where the United Kingdom has voted for this very different conception of itself, all the polling and the obvious logic tells you they'll vote yes.
Let's move on from that because we want to get back to
As I was saying, it depends. When asked whether they wish to leave the United Kingdom, they will be taking a very hard-headed and canny decision about what they will be leaving and what they will be going to. And all I'm saying is that we don't know what either of those things at this moment is going to look like in a couple of years' time. The EU has known only war and bloodshed. I have great sympathy with this. One of the foundational aims of the EU was an entirely noble aim, that never again should the continent of Europe know fascism and know war over the extinction of freedom. It was a never-again moment, and the never-again moment was to constrain Germany forever, because Germany was seen to be the problem in Europe, and to constrain it in a way that meant that nations should no longer be nations. They should sacrifice a bit of their nationness in order to join together, because by joining together, it would mean that there would never be war again. Very noble aim. The result of that aim, I'm afraid, has been contrary to what the founders intended, because in my view, in order to protect freedom and democracy, you cannot extinguish freedom and democracy. And what we have seen is that the aspiration of the EU itself, is currently creating the revival of fascist, neo-fascist, neo-Nazi, extreme nationalist movements across Europe, from people by people who have found that the entire political establishment of Europe is as one to say that there is something intrinsically nasty about the nation. If there is something intrinsically nasty about the nation, it follows there is something intrinsically nasty about national self-government and democracy. And I am on the side of national self-government and democracy. The people who are exulting, Vladimir Putin, well, Jonathan may think he knows what's in Vladimir Putin's mind. I would not claim to have that knowledge. Donald Trump, well, we can all sneer at Donald Trump, can't we? A very convenient bogeyman. But among the people who are rejoicing at Brexit and who are saying, let's have it too, are the populations of countries like, for example, the Netherlands and Sweden, who are saying, look what they've done, we want it too. And why are they saying that? Are they all nasty, xenophobic, racist troglodytes? They can't be, they're Swedes and they're Dutch people. Now, an un-Jewish thing to do, to vote to support Brexit. I think it's a very Anshel Pfeffer in Haaretz said, voting Brexit is an un-Jewish thing to do, and any British Jew who votes Brexit, I paraphrase, is betraying their own history of their own grandparents and great-grandparents who were themselves refugees and migrants, and betraying basically the Jewish people. I thought that was a disgusting thing to say. It is very un-Jewish to demonize people who have a different point of view from yours. And secondly, to equate well, first of all, to say that there is an analogy between the Jewish refugee and migrant movement of the last century, and what the whole of Europe is facing, which is a continental-wide emergency due to the fact that because of various factors, geopolitical factors, which have very significantly changed the entire landscape over the last few years, greater freedom of movement in terms of the ability to get on a plane or a boat, the particular wars and tyrannies which are driving people to want to leave, and so on and so forth. The whole of Europe is facing a problem, a very significant problem. The entirety of that problem is certainly not coming this way to Britain, but we can see that a very large proportion, relatively speaking, of such people do want to come to Britain. And before even we got to that point, it seemed to me there was a point at which we were rapidly reaching where simply in terms of sustaining our structures of public services, we were getting to the point where our immigration levels were becoming unsustainable. And it was a matter of horror to me that anyone who said this was instantly branded a racist or xenophobe, simply on the grounds that they believed that it was right and proper for a nation to say there is a limit to the number of people we can take. And I thought that was a horrible thing to have to live through. It has demonized millions of people who voted Brexit very largely because of that fact that they had been demonized in wanting to have a country that was able to sustain itself. And for a Jewish writer to seek to demonize other Jews for voting in this way, I thought was disgusting and disgraceful, and it turned my stomach.
Okay. This is such a short panel, but we're going to try, and we're not going to take questions, but we're going to try and ask two more questions to both of you, whoever would like to answer. In terms of anti-Semitism in Europe today, yes, Jonathan, please. Anti-Semitism and the questions of BDS, and then merging it into the second question I was going to ask about Middle East and Israel. Does Brexit, does the situation now, what kind of effects do you see that having on any of those issues?
Well, the gloomiest thought I have on the anti-Semitism point is, and I've sort of hinted at this in something I've written this weekend, is just that this level of economic instability that's being foretold. I mean, I'm not talking about just of the last week, where the pound has plunged to its lowest level in 30 years and $2 trillion was wiped off global stocks in 24 hours. I'm not just talking about that. I'm talking about what's foreseen. The Economist Intelligence Unit said that there'll be a 6% contraction from where we would have been in 2020. We're going to go into a recession next year. You just see it already in the contracts that have been cancelled, the jobs that are lost, etc. History suggests, and this is slightly sort of a world-weary perspective to hear from a Jewish person, but that when economic times are bad, that's never really good for the Jews. People do often look to those to look for someone to blame, and that's often been us historically. I also think it happens to be the case, you just notice it, social media, etc., that the EU performed a very useful role as being the scapegoat. We could always blame the EU for our problems. It was those meddling bureaucrats. And it does cross my mind that with them gone, people are going to look for something else to blame. And that, again, triggers a sort of old nerve in me. Economic instability of this kind, combined with the reassertion of nationalism, in a very particular, British way, in which may be much more softer-edged, but across continental Europe, it's a much harsher force. I don't have quite the benign view of nationalism reborn in Europe, I'm afraid. It doesn't please me that much. I'm more with those founders of the European Union who thought this was a force that, through bitter experience, 2 world wars, we needed to restrain. I quite like the idea of Germany being the kind of Gulliver tied down by 27 other members. And actually, as it happens, a lot of Germans like that too. And we're now not there. And we have pulled a guy rope out of this structure, to mix the metaphor, that could now come undone. So I worry about all of those things in terms of the point about anti-Semitism. I don't particularly worry that without Britain there at the table, the European Union will now be more hostile to Israel. I don't really think that. I think other countries in the European Union have Israel's back, and I think it feels to me to be a more side issue